We're here to talk about the digital world. And I think that what I should say at the outset is that the world is faced with a challenge in the form of an individual who conducts his entire global policy on a media forum called Truth Social. Right? This is the age we live in. Donald Trump, the American president, posts every decision, including tariffs on India, on the social media network, the social network that he's part of.
Bursting into all caps, period.
In all caps, ending with, I
Shouty.
draw your, thank you for your attention to this matter. On a serious note, Dr. Tharoor, I think a lot of people in the room would want to know how the rules of the game have changed. You've worn many hats in your life. You have been at the United Nations, you have been a 4-time member of parliament, and most recently, you have been one of India's most effective global ambassadors for our messaging on Operation Sindoor. Here you are confronted with a world leader, a powerful world leader, arguably by virtue of being the American president, still the world's most powerful leader, who conducts his policy making, his decision making, like a child thinking out loud.
That's right.
And then types it all out. What does that do to countries, to people like yourselves, who have been trained in a much more classic way?
Well, it's certainly unprecedented and probably unlikely to be repeated, but we have a very idiosyncratic figure there. I think my short advice is don't take him literally on Truth Social, but take him seriously. That is, that the specific language, which frankly is like that of a schoolyard bully. I once compared this business of the Indian economy is dead and so on to a schoolyard bully telling a smaller child your mother is ugly. It's not meant to be taken literally. The chap may not even have seen the child's mother. It's a way of belittling and demeaning the other person in order to make him feel small, and then you push your point, whatever you want to do. It's, for lack of a better term, it's a negotiating tactic. So we don't, I think, have to react to the actual words because or the actual tweets on Truth Social. But we have to understand the intent behind and engage with that. And that is actually pretty serious and pretty troubling for us. And so each time the challenge is going to be, number one, of course, you may feel offended by the hectoring, the bullying, the insulting language. But the bigger challenge for us has got to be, how do we look beyond the language to the content of what he wants and then decide how we feel about that? Now, obviously, I feel that the content of what he wants is not acceptable to India.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have every right to push back. But for the moment, a lot of the rhetoric in our own political space has been about the language, and I think that's a mistake.
But you know, when you think of Trump and you say he's like a schoolyard bully, and don't take him literally, but take him seriously. Imagine, if you will, that the digital universe is the modern version of a school sandpit. So in a school, you'd have the bully come up, rough up a child younger or smaller than him or her, and say something mean. Here you have the digital sandpit. And Trump, unfortunately, what he says he usually does. So when you say don't take him literally, he said, penalties are coming, and in his mind they came. So we're confronted with a situation where our counter is still the classic idiom. So you have the foreign ministry, writing out a very nuanced press release on hypocrisy of the world's American purchase of, business with Russia, over 3.5 billion. But Trump isn't using that language. So how do you counter a digital bully in today's geopolitics if you're still following the old rules?
No, I don't think that you need to change your behavior to be like him. That's
so you
clear.
don't want our diplomats also tweeting in all caps back to him?
I don't. In fact, I'll tell you a story which you will resonate with because it's your profession. Larry King, I was interviewing him on CNN. Larry King, at that point, legendary, world-famous interview and so on. And he asked Trump, what is your negotiating style? So Trump said, do you mind if I move my chair a little farther away from you? Do you know you have terrible breath? You really have bad breath. Has anyone told you that? Larry King's face falls. The man is crestfallen. Trump then dominates the interview, gets whatever he wants to say across, makes Larry King look like a twip. And at the end of the interview, when the cameras are off, he gets up and says, you wanted to know my negotiating style? That's my negotiating style. So that is Trump. He does things for effect. And the success that he claims he's had, I mean, the art of the deal and so on, comes from that style. So we have to be a little wise to what's going on here. Some people have even suggested to me, Americans, that all Trump wanted was to raise the stakes in front of his domestic audience so that when India and America came up with a trade deal, he could sell it as a dramatic victory for him. Now, I think that may have been a possible logic at the end of the first 25% if we had finally come to a compromise around 16 or 17 or whatever, and then we could have said, we're happy, they're happy, and he could have claimed a big victory. But once he added the extra 25, that went out of the window. Because at this point, you put India in a position, number one, where even China isn't in. China's been given 90 days negotiating window. We've been given 30. And that means that on the 27th of August, not even 30, 3 weeks. So on the 27th of August, we are going to have 50% tariffs, whereas China will have 30%. I mean, that's the bottom will drop out of the entire export list, export basket in America for us. Second challenge is that apart from that, there is the arrant hypocrisy of sanctioning us and not China, sanctioning us and not the EU, sanctioning us and saying that our money is fueling the war machine when America's own imports of uranium hexafluoride, of fertilizers, of palladium for catalytic converters, all of this is cheerfully taking place. This year has gone up 285% from the first 5 months of last year. And his dollars are not fueling the Russian war machine, only our dollars are.
And when he's confronted with those figures, he says, I don't know.
Yeah, he really doesn't know. That's the problem with Trump. I mean, you're really dealing with somebody. So, initially I even thought the American-India relationship is about far more than Trump. Let him make his noises on Truth Social. But at the working level, serious talking is going on. There is still some slender hope left that in the negotiations between our Commerce Ministry team and their trade negotiators team, that they really are discussing nuts and bolts. But the atmospherics
That's if those talks happen, because he seemed to indicate that even those talks may not happen.
No, talks are going on.
Okay, all right.
They may not be going on in terms of two delegations sitting across a table today, but they're certainly in touch with each other. They've initiated processes. There are questions that have been raised. There are people in India exploring what concessions can we make. There are people in America exploring what can we accept. There are mutual explanations going on. As far as I'm aware, we're not just sitting on our hands during these 3 weeks, but I'm also now much more skeptical that we can arrive at something. Because you see, the surround sound around Trump's language and behavior has upped the political stakes very badly in this country too.
Yeah.
Where anything now that India concedes, even if we might have conceded it in a different context, will suddenly look like we caved into Trump's bullying. And that will be politically unsaleable for any government, certainly for a government as proud as the present one. So I'm really beginning, it was so funny. One of the things I was doing today, I had written a column for the week, which was going to go to press on Tuesday or Wednesday, and I had submitted to them. And suddenly, everything I had written got upended by the second 25%. And I was literally revising both the conclusion and the tone of what I had written, because I no longer can cheerfully say, let's focus on the real underlying strengths of the Indo-US relationship and not worry about Trump's schoolyard bully language. Whereas in fact now, that schoolyard bully language plus 50% has essentially, I think, seriously jeopardized our own strategic calculations and what successive American administrations have been doing for a quarter of a century to prevent may now suddenly come back on the anvil. And that is the emergence of a Russia-China-India axis, which we had very deliberately distanced ourselves away from. Even though we used to have these annual meetings of the foreign ministers of what was called RIC, and that hasn't happened, by the way, for a few years now, what we were doing was, we were just showing it as a means of saying we haven't abandoned all our options, but we were being much more serious about Quad, for example, or I2U2 in the Middle East, which are all American-led plurilateral initiatives. Now, many people in the foreign ministry must be asking themselves, do we need to put our eggs in that basket? Isn't this the one that we really need to replenish? Because at least the Russians and the Chinese don't abruptly well, the Chinese have not been very nice to us over Operation Sindoor, so that's another matter. But on the other hand, the Chinese can turn around and say, well, you moved away from us faster and first. And now you're asking us to come back. We're willing to talk. I don't know. There's stuff happening now which would have been inconceivable 3 months ago, 2 months ago. You know, when Sindoor happened,
Yeah.
I would have said it was a major setback for any prospects of that India-China thaw that had begun in September, October of last year. And as far as Russia was concerned, we had things going, but it was a much more transactional relationship than a strategic partnership. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You're selling us oil, you got nowhere else, no one else to buy it. We'll buy it because it's cheaper for us. That kind of transaction.
And our army has said that China was not just providing weaponry to Pakistan, but live inputs.
China did something very, very dramatic during Sindoor, which I'm sure that many of you are probably aware of. The so-called Chinese kill chain got activated. What is a Chinese kill chain? It is a simultaneous linkage of radar, GPS, the trigger mechanisms on missiles and on planes, and real-time data on satellites. Now, Pakistan has no satellites. It's Chinese satellites that were sending in real time positions of Indian planes, Indian weaponry, Indian whatever movement was happening. And that's how the Pakistanis were able to attack on the night of the 7th, 8th, and 8th, 9th. I mean, mainly 7th, 8th, which is when they took us by surprise, because we were not aware that the Chinese and Pakistanis were collaborating to this degree and this capacity had been activated in Pakistan. So that's why whatever setbacks we undertook on that second night. First night, we dominated. Second night, they dominated because we were taken aback thanks to the Chinese. Third night, we regrouped. Fourth night, we devastated them. So that was more or less the narrative, very simplistically, of the 4 days of the 88-hour war. But the Chinese involvement was very, very serious. It was accompanied by Chinese backing for Pakistan and the UN Security Council. Even after Pahalgam, for example, when the Pakistanis successfully prevented the reference to the resistance front, China backed them on the council. Now the US has come around and accepted that we were right, and they have listed the resistance front as a terror organization. Tomorrow, that would mean the Americans would be more on our side if this issue came up again. Or so we would think, but I have no idea anymore what Trump wants America's stand to be on anything.
So to come back to what that does to taking on a schoolyard bully like Donald Trump, and the noise that accompanies him, and the noise that then follows on platforms like X, that we still all call Twitter, or other forums, there's been some suggestion that India has been old world in how our diplomats, our establishment has responded firmly, but in a language that is not strident in the way that Trump
No,
is.
strident is not our style. Barkha, don't let anybody else make you what you're not. And I don't think we should go strident. I have said myself, and I'm nobody, I'm a member of the opposition, but I have said that really, if on the 27th of August, we have 50% tariffs on Indian goods in America, that day we should impose 50% tariffs on American goods in India. That I think we should be, that much we should do.
And you continue to believe that?
Absolutely. Because if America doesn't value its strategic partnership with us, why do we value it more than them? That's my personal view, but as I said, I have no executive role in any of this. Secondly, language. We should not behave the way Trump is behaving. We have no equivalent of Trump, as
That's
it were,
right.
in our system.
Thank God.
Thank
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
But I must say, below the Trump level, nobody has said anything like this other than one obnoxious senator, whom we can certainly dismiss as being the obnoxious personality that he is. And in any case, we can also get our own more obnoxious politicians to say a few words to him. That's not the issue. I think from government to government, we should preserve the lines of dialogue. There are still some very many big fundamentals we shouldn't overlook. That was what I had written in my original article that I was busy correcting. Number one is the fact that we do actually have core strategic interests. I'm worried about China. The Americans were worried about China. I don't know if they still aren't. Maybe we too will have to worry less about China, but I'm very seriously worried about China. They have an enormous stake in Pakistan, and that's given them a buy-in that has put us at a major strategic disadvantage. And they have been misbehaving for the last decade on our disputed frontier.
Yeah.
Plus, you've seen that the BRI for them is so important, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which has saved them literally 95% of the time and 90% of the cost of getting goods into Western China from the Gulf and so on. Because of that, they will almost do anything to support Pakistan against us. And because it's impossible to conceive of Pakistan becoming a peace-loving nation as far as India is concerned, it seems to me we have a fundamental problem with China. But anyway, be that as it may, if America is now Trump is saying he wants to meet Xi, they've given them 90 days, there might even be talks that will reduce because of course, the Chinese have things the Americans can't do without, of which rare earths are fundamental. I mean, everything from phone to car batteries to God knows what else, they need the Chinese stuff. And so Trump is suddenly being told by his own ecosystem that you better go a little easier on China. India, unfortunately, is not selling them anything that's indispensable. Right? The one thing that comes close is pharmaceuticals. And so far as I understand, pharmaceuticals are exempt from this tariff thing. Eventually, something may or may not come, but then the American consumer who's buying his favorite Indian-made pills will be paying the difference, not us. But having said this, as far as this entire thing is concerned, we no longer know whether that strategic partnership stands. Secondly, the economic relationship. America was India's biggest trading partner. It cannot be after 27th of August. End of story. So we'll have to look for other markets, other places. That driver is no longer there. Third, we had been enhancing defense cooperation. There were advanced talks going on about a couple of very sophisticated American weapons, planes, missiles, which actually had never been sold to a country like us before, but which America was prepared to sell. We were on the verge of signing on the dotted line. In fact, Rajnath Singh was supposed to go this month. That trip has been postponed. The talks have been suspended. So all the things that I thought we can rely upon are no longer clear. The only thing that remains is that we have almost 4 million Americans of Indian descent who constitute a very important element in agitating for a better relationship with India. Will they be heard? Will they make their noises? Will they talk to the administration? Time will only tell.
You know, one of the things you've said is that Trump picked the wrong target, that he made a mistake in thinking that Indians wouldn't stand up to a bully. And that's true. But everything you've just described about China, and I agree with every word you've said, Trump is so transactional that he'll go and meet Putin, he'll try cut a deal with Putin, he'll go and meet Xi, he'll try cut a deal with Xi. Where does that leave India's options in this fast-changing world?
Sold us down the river. So this is why India will have to rethink it. All the strategic assumptions of
Each one of the relations.
The last quarter of a century will now have to be reviewed and must be being reviewed right now in New Delhi. And I think that we are seeing a couple of straws in the wind, the cancellation or deferral of Rajnath Singh's travel to America, the announcement of Modi's trip to China on the 31st of August, the announcement of Putin's trip to India, which is going to be before the end of the year. Number of things are moving on the chessboard. Watch and wait.
Let me ask you in the end, Shashi, what happens to messaging? You know, when you traveled across the world on Operation Sindoor as part of other all-party delegations, you were carrying India's message.
And it was very well received. I can assure you of that because I met at so many levels of the US administration, the US political ecosystem. I met the vice president. I met the deputy secretary of state and the entire State Department bureaucracy dealing with India. I met the council on the senators dealing with foreign relations. I met the House Committee on Foreign Relations. I met other senators interested in the subcontinent. I met other congressmen interested in the subcontinent. I met all the think tanks. I addressed the Council on Foreign Relations. I spoke at the National Press Club. I had a joint meeting with 22 Washington-based think tanks dealing with India. I cannot tell you, everywhere our message was extremely well received, with respect, with support, and with empathy. So for me, what Trump has said and done is so discordant that I initially was prepared to dismiss it just as one individual, somewhat idiosyncratic behavior. But now, of course, it's gone too far. And maybe it just challenges everything fundamental. But until this happened, I really thought that our relationship with the US was in very, very good shape. I remember the High Commissioner throwing a dinner in our honor. The number of top people who came from senators, congressmen, every single one of the Indian American congressmen, the White House anti-terrorism coordinator. You had really top-notch people in the American political
So why do you think Trump has done this? Before I come back to messaging, is this something personal? Did he want Somebody, did he think we would nominate him for the Nobel Prize? Because that clearly wasn't going to
Is
happen.
there anybody here who understands why Trump has done what
And now
he's done?
that, Colonel, is one answer Google can't give us.
That's right.
That you cannot Google, why is Donald Trump crazy?
Well,
But
I didn't say
okay,
that,
crazy
and I
was
wouldn't
my
say that.
crazy was my
Why did he do what he did? Why
was
did he
my
say what he said?
unparliamentary language.
Yeah,
I withdraw that. But why is Donald Trump the way he is? I don't
that's
think
right.
Google has the
I don't
answer
think
to that.
Google has an answer.
But
When I was asked by your former colleague Radip Sadesai, I said, "Ask Melania how to deal with Trump." He asked me, "How do you deal with Trump?" I said, "Ask Melania, don't ask me." But
I'm
anyway.
not sure she would know the answer to it either. But
Well,
listen,
she's dealt with him successfully for a while. I'll tell you.
but here's the serious question. I mean, and the time is up, and that's my last question on Operation Sindoor, on messaging. We just had, I don't even think people in the hall may know this because it's happened moments ago, the Indian Air Force chief do a press conference in Bangalore, revealing for the first time that 5 Pakistani jets, fighter jets, were shot down by India. This is extremely a big piece of news, and I can hear some people wanting to clap, so please go ahead. It's a big piece of news. And this has come, India has chosen its own time to reveal this and not got provoked by the many sort of needling questions about how many Rafales went down or didn't go down and so on. My question is about messaging. This is a big, big, big piece of information. Our country continues to be conservative. I say this as a compliment: conservative, dignified, poised, and almost cautious in how we reveal information. It is at odds with how much of the world is behaving today. And I just wanted, in the end, your response to this big piece of information. Are you surprised that we didn't know this sooner?
Yeah, I respect the logic behind the Indian approach, but I would have definitely preferred to do it differently. That is,
Like how?
I would, well, first of all, to talk about things in real time. Those briefings by Vikram Misri and the 2 women colonels were superb. In fact, I got all my guidance from that. No one was briefing me privately from the government. I'm in the opposition. I was watching TV like you and everybody else. And believe me, that was enough because it was so well done. Our messaging was very clear. And when I went, I was able to build my own framing of that message because the core message was so clear. Second, as far as the losses were concerned, and therefore maybe even the victories, we would not normally
Talk about
reveal
it in
during
public.
an ongoing conflict, and nor did the other side. So, but as far as anything that could be publicly confirmed through non-intelligence sources, we could have revealed that sooner. I'll give you one example. When commercial satellites were revealing that we had hit those bases, we were not embarrassed about showing that we had hit 11 bases, right? So similarly, I think we could have said that, look, we happen to target all these things and we've got them done. It would have bucked up the morale of the Indian public, especially at a time when a lot of the initial coverage was rather negative. You remember, I don't know if you remember this, but there were these stories that the Rafales had been overcome by the Chinese missiles. And literally, there were even stories that the defense company in China that produced the PL-10 missiles and the aircraft had shot up in stock market value, whereas Dassault, that makes the Rafale, had lost value and all that sort of stuff, which obviously people reading all this must have felt, my gosh, we've done badly in the war. In fact, we had not done that badly. Why were correctives
I mean,
not
we
put
had
up?
not done badly at all. We devastated their
We
bases.
devastated them at the end. But this was happening during the actual fighting, these stories I'm telling you about. I think we could have been a little more proactive, particularly about things that could have helped, counteract the narrative. There was a lot of, frankly, widespread perception internationally that Pakistan was winning
But
the
sorry,
narrative war.
I'm arguing here. But Chief of Defense Staff Anil Chauhan, he said it doesn't matter what happened along the way. It's a little bit like, to borrow from your favorite cricket world, it's a little bit like arguing how many wickets were lost on the way when you've had an innings victory. Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair enough to say that it doesn't matter. In fact, Rajnath Singh made the similar thing. If the child does well in the examinations, do you ask him whether he broke his pencil?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you can have all these analogies and so on, but at the end of the day, the other side is putting out other stuff for their own motivations. I'm sure the Chinese were very happy to boost the international reputation of their weaponry and their missiles and so on. The Pakistanis were also, I mean, you remember one of the major purposes of Pahalgam was to actually pull the Pakistani army out of its domestic doldrums and give the military credibility by giving them. Yeah. They knew when they did Pahalgam that India would react. We had no choice, we had to react. And they knew that that would mean that everybody would rally around the flag and the military would benefit. So for the Pakistani military, putting out a narrative that made them look good was going to be fundamental. We weren't counteracting that early enough and effectively enough during the conflict. I think that the multi-party delegations were a great idea. I think they were effective. They did actually give a counter messaging. And I do believe that if we had done that a bit earlier, perhaps even done it just before Operation Sindhu, we might even have scored better in the international media approach. Sadly, we were scrambling a couple of weeks after Pakistan was already perceived as having got their point of view across. That's when we were going out with our point of view.
So there will always be debates on messaging, information warfare in an increasingly digitized and digital world. Time is up. People are hungry. We are going to leave it there. I think this was a great conversation. Shashi is always delightful. Let's have a big round of applause for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. And thank you so much, everybody.